One of the most lasting mythical traditions in human history began and thrived for more than 3,000 years along the life-giving banks of the Nile, where lush black soil meets golden beaches. A rich tapestry of supernatural creatures, cosmic conflicts, and deep knowledge, Egyptian mythology is a massive triumph of human imagination that has captivated us for millennia, even after the final hieroglyphics were etched. Egyptian mythology continues to retain a strong hold on our collective psyche, in contrast to many other ancient belief systems that have fallen into obscurity. Literature, cinema, art, and popular culture all over the world have been influenced by the captivating vision of falcon-headed gods, the secrets of the pyramids, and the attraction of the afterlife voyage. There is a reason for this persistent attraction. Basic human worries about creation, order, against chaos, mortality, and the possibility of life beyond death are all addressed in Egyptian mythology, beginning with the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under the first pharaoh in 3100 BCE. Egyptian mythology developed over a very long period of time rather than emerging fully formed. Throughout the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms, as well as beyond, this mythology kept evolving, even incorporating aspects of Greek and Roman philosophy in the later Ptolemaic era. Egypt's mythology was significantly influenced by its topography. The Egyptians placed a strong emphasis on cycles' rebirth and the restoration of order because of the Nile's regular yearly flooding, which delivered rich silt to an otherwise harsh desert region. This natural occurrence was reflected in mythological cycles, such as the sun's daily voyage, the death and resurrection of Osiris, and the god Ra. Unlike the Bible or the Iliad, Egyptian mythology was not collected in a single canonical work. Thousands of inscriptions, papyri, tomb paintings, temple reliefs, and funerary artifacts instead contain fragments of it. Our most thorough sources are the Book of the Dead from the New Kingdom, the Pyramid texts from the Old Kingdom, and the Coffin texts from the Middle Kingdom. Nonetheless, even these mostly concentrate on ideas about the afterlife rather than providing whole mythological stories. Egyptian stories were dynamic and changed significantly throughout time, according to archaeological data. Gods combined, divided, or altered their characteristics. Local creation myths differed, and the pantheon occasionally incorporated alien gods. The Egyptians' dedication to upholding Mahat, the essential idea of truth, balance, and cosmic order, remained consistent. For the ancient Egyptians, mythology was a live reality that pervaded every facet of life, rather than only an abstract collection of stories. The pharaoh was more than just a political leader. He was Horus's live manifestation, upholding cosmic order via ceremonial acts. Temples were more than simply structures. They were horizon houses where heaven and earth met, and maintaining the gods, who in turn maintained creation, required exact daily rituals. By commemorating occasions like the yearly flooding of the Nile, which is connected to the tears of Isis, or the homecoming of the goddess Hathor from Nubia, which signals the start of the inundation season. Common people interacted with mythology through public celebrations. Deities like Bez and Taweret were revered in household shrines and guarded families from anything from poisonous animals to difficult deliveries. Even magic and medicine were inextricably linked to mythology. In order to conquer disease, which was commonly ascribed to evil, supernatural powers, healing procedures typically used recitations that identified the patient with Horus and the healer with Thoth or Isis. scarab beetles represented the sun god's capacity for regeneration, while amulets, fashioned like the Eye of Horus, offered protection from bad luck. Through tales of divine judgment, Egyptian mythology set behavioral norms, justified social structures, comforted people about mortality, and explained natural events. To see these stories as merely archaic attempts to explain the inexplicable, however, would be a mistake. By presenting the same supernatural forces through a variety of symbolic forms and tales that worked on numerous levels of meaning. Concurrently, the highly developed Egyptian priesthood demonstrated its capacity for abstract theological thought. We will come upon a worldview that is both strange and shockingly familiar as we begin this investigation of Egyptian mythology. Even though they have animal heads, the gods we will encounter have recognizable human emotions. We will see creation myths that are thousands of years ahead of scientific ideas. We'll look at an afterlife vision that was so powerful that it shaped later religious traditions. One of the longest-lasting civilizations in history was established by the ancient Egyptians, whose culture remained remarkably consistent despite shifting conditions. Their mythology, which preserved fundamental ideas while adapting to political, social, and intellectual advancements across 3 millennia, also struck a balance between conservatism and creativity. Egyptian mythology never really perished, even though the final temple dedicated to the Egyptian gods closed around 700 years ago, and hieroglyphic reading was lost until the Rosetta Stone was deciphered in the 19th century. It endures not just in academic publications and museum exhibits, but also in our enduring interest in its timeless themes and deep significance. We'll learn why these old tales still have relevance in the present as we explore this mythical environment, which provides insights into the Egyptian way of thinking, as well as the universal human predicament. There was nothing in the beginning, only the black, formless, endless ocean of primordial chaos before there were any gods or people, before the earth and sky existed. All creation would arise from these primordial waters, albeit the exact process differed depending on where in Egypt the question was posed. In contrast to many other civilizations, the ancient Egyptians kept several creation stories at the same time, each highlighting a distinct facet of cosmic beginnings and being connected to a potent cult center. These origin stories were viewed as complementary viewpoints on a mystery too deep for any one story to adequately explain, rather than as voles or contradictions. The Heliopolitan cosmogony, which was created by the priests of Heliopolis, the ancient city of the sun, was the most well-known of these origin stories. Their traditions state that the creator deity, Atum, self-created rising from the turbulent seas of Nun, a potent picture derived from the yearly retreat of the Nile's inundation. The creator in some tales appeared upon the primordial mound, the first solid earth to rise from the floodwaters. In some cultures, this primordial deity manifested as the Benben stone, a pyramid-shaped artifact that represented the first rays of sunshine emerging from the night. This self-made deity was alone in the universe when he first arrived. He was able to have children without a partner because he was whole within with both masculine and female parts. The myth's most vivid version depicts the creator holding his phallus in his hand and using divine masturbation to bring out his first 2 children. Tefnut, the goddess of wetness, and Shu, the deity of air and dryness. According to some stories, these gods form from the creator's spit and sneeze, which are body fluids that represent the divine creative power, or from the divine semen. Shu and Tefnut were split off from their father in the murky seas of Nun when they were created. The creator, later identified with the goddess Hathor, dispatched his eye to look for his missing offspring. His tears of pleasure dropped to the ground upon their happy reunion, and he became the first human. The Egyptian concept that humans came from divine substance, not as slaves to the gods, but as beings connected to them via shared essence, is revealed in this heartwarming legendary event. Geb, the soil deity, and Nut, the sky goddess, were the offspring of the first divine couple, Shu and Tefnut. At first, these gods were embraced tightly, Nut arching over Geb in cosmic unity. Then their father Shu divided them, making Geb lie like the ground, and raising Nut high above to become the vault of heaven. The area between turned into our planet, where Shu governed the atmosphere and air. Before being permanently split up, Geb and Nut were able to have 5 children, despite their forced separation. Horus, the elder, Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. Together with their forebears, these 5 gods made up the great Ennead of Heliopolis, the 9 main gods that would influence Egyptian religion for thousands of years. These gods' intricate alliances, rivalries, and interactions would give rise to the rich, legendary stories that characterized Egyptian spiritual imagination. In Hermopolis, where priests revered the Ogdoad, 8 primordial deities who existed before creation itself, a radically new origin story emerged. 4 complementary pairs of male and female creatures made up these gods, each of whom stood for a distinct facet of the chaos that existed before creation. The ancient waterways are Nun and Nonet, Amun and Amunet, invisibility and concealment, eternity and infinity between him and Hauhet, and darkness, Kelket and Kek. It was thought that these 8 gods, who were usually shown with the heads of frogs and serpents to represent their basic pre-creation nature, pooled their energies to form the cosmic egg from which the sun god sprang on the primordial mound. According to this story, the sun deity, who is often referred to as Ra Kepri or Thoth, depending on the particular tradition, was released when this cosmic egg hatched, marking the first light of creation. According to some myths, this egg was deposited on the mound by a celestial bird that rose from the seas, possibly an ibis falcon, or the Bennu bird, the Egyptian phoenix. The first sunlight, the beginning of time, and the emergence of organized life from primordial chaos were all signified by the hatching moment. Another creation theology, emphasizing the universe's intellectual rather than physical genesis, emerged in Memphis. Ptah, the creator deity, created the universe by using his heart, mind, and tongue to speak according to the Memphite theology that was preserved on the Shabaka stone. In addition to creating physical reality, Ptah also created abstract ideas, heavenly laws, and cultural establishments by imagining the cosmos and pronouncing it into being. Even the other creator gods, like as Adam, were sprung from Ptah, according to this elaborate creation story. According to the Memphite priests, Ptah summoned the Ennead into being with his mighty voice after conceiving them in his heart. This creation by divine speech suggests the deep philosophical depth of Egyptian religion at its most abstract level, and it remarkably prefigures the logos notion in later Greek and Judeo-Christian philosophy. Egyptian creation mythology was dominated by the Heliopolitan, Hermopolitan, and Memphite cosmogonies, although there were many additional regional traditions that thrived all across the country. At Elephantine, on the southern frontier of Egypt, the ram-headed creator deity Khnum was said to use clay from the Nile to create humanity on his potter's wheel. As a heavenly craftswoman, the goddess Neith was credited in Esna with creating creation. During the New Kingdom in Thebes, Amun became a well-known creation deity before combining with Ra to form Amun-Ra, the ruler of the gods. Some motifs recur often in these diverse Genesis narratives. Darkness and formless waters are always the starting points of creation. The earliest solid ground is a primitive mound. Usually, the creator god is self-generated, emerging from nothingness by their own will. The act of creation itself is a continuous process that needs to be continuously upheld against the forces of disorder that pose a threat to the restoration of the universe's order. Most revealingly, the idea of creation from nothing is never mentioned in Egyptian creation stories. Rather, the gods of creation divide, arrange, and bring previously chaotic materials into orderly actuality. Creation is the imposition of meaningful structure upon formlessness, rather than the creation of anything from nothing. This idea is a reflection of the Egyptian environment, where farming relied on directing and managing floodwaters from the Nile to produce fruitful fields out of muddy flooding. Modern brains used to looking for one clear answer may find the variety of Egyptian origin stories perplexing. Nonetheless, Egyptian religion was able to change across 3 millennia while retaining its fundamental qualities because to this theological flexibility. It was not necessary to repudiate earlier traditions in order to syncretize, harmonize, and overlay the symbolic meanings of several creator gods. By seeing complementary truths in seemingly disparate tales, this intellectual approach demonstrates a sophisticated theological sensibility that understood the limitations of any one explanation for the ultimate mystery of life. A pantheon of deities more varied and numerous than those of nearly any other ancient civilization sprang from the primordial waters and divine acts of creation. According to the Egyptians themselves, there were 42 gods, a clearly symbolic number that suggests an infinite number of divine manifestations. These were complicated individuals with deep relationships, changing characteristics, and multiple responsibilities that developed over millennia of Egyptian history rather than merely personifications of natural elements. The sun god Ra, whose daily flight across the sky in his solar bark symbolized the most obvious and essential cosmic pattern, stood at the heart of this celestial assemblage. Re, who was shown with the sun disk atop a falcon's head, represented warmth, light, and vitality. Ra, governed from his celestial seat as the creator and monarch of the gods upholding Maya, the universe's basic order. Ra would be reborn every morning in the east as the scarab-headed deity of the rising sun Khepri. He was at his strongest at midday as Ra, and in the evening he transformed into Atum, the setting sun, in preparation for his midnight underworld expedition. Ra was the ideal representation of endless renewal, a notion that was essential to Egyptian philosophy because of this cycle of rebirth. Osiris, the king of the underworld and judge of the dead, was the only god who more perfectly personified this idea of rebirth. Osiris was formerly a fertility deity connected to the life-giving Nile, but his death and resurrection gave him global importance. Osiris became the first mummy and the archetype for anybody who aspired to triumph over death when he was killed by his envious brother, Set, the god of chaos and desert storms. His characteristic tall-plumed crown reflected his regal authority over the world of the dead, while his green skin in Egyptian art stood for greenery and regeneration. Osiris, the king of the afterlife, promised that death was only a change of status rather than the end of life. A story about Osiris wouldn't be complete without mentioning his loyal wife Isis, who is arguably the most powerful and adaptable deity in Egypt. Known for her crafty wit and magical abilities, Isis sheltered her husband throughout a perilous upbringing, produced their son Horus after his death, and rebuilt his mutilated corpse. She was the epitome of the ideal mother and wife due to her ingenuity and perseverance, and her magical understanding allowed her to control protection and healing. Her name literally means throne, and Isis, who is shown with a throne hieroglyph on her head, symbolized heavenly queenship and regal authority. Eventually, her worship would become one of the most widely practiced faiths in the Roman Empire, spreading throughout the Mediterranean region. Horus, the god offspring of Isis and Osiris, stood for legitimacy and legitimate succession, two ideas that were essential to a culture that was fixated on continuity. Horus, who is usually shown with the head of a falcon, was originally a sky god whose eyes stood for the sun and moon. Horus and his uncle Set fought a cosmic battle for 80 years following the murder of his father. Horus's triumph and coronation marked the conclusion of this struggle between order and chaos, fertility and barrenness, legacy and usurpation, and set the precedent for all earthly succession. An endless cycle of royal regeneration was established, with each monarch who died becoming one with Osiris, and every pharaoh who was still alive being regarded as the incarnation of Horus. In Egyptian religion, Set, who is sometimes misinterpreted as a straightforward antagonist, had a more nuanced function. Set, the deity of storms, deserts, chaos, and alien places, stood for essential yet perilous elements. He had a terrifying reputation for killing Osiris and fighting Horus. However, the Egyptians understood that the universe depended on his chaotic energy. Set showed that even destructive force may be used for greater good by defending Ra's sunboat from Apophis, the snake of chaos. In certain eras, especially when foreign dynasties controlled Egypt, Set was revered. His red hair and characteristic animal head, possibly an aardvark or other mythical beast, becoming symbols of great power rather than malevolence. Anubis, the jackal-headed mummification and tomb guardian deity, was one of the most aesthetically striking Egyptian deities. His connection to the old cemetery haunting jackals turned a hated scavenger into a heavenly protector. Anubis led the dead into the afterlife, his jet-black skin representing the rich soil and resurrection. He carried out the vital task of comparing the deceased's heart to Marwat's feather to decide who should be granted eternal life. Embalmers, whose holy work turned perishable bodies into immortal containers for the soul, were patronized by Anubis because of his meticulous attention to correct burial rites. Egypt's deity of intelligence, writing, and magic. Basically, the divine intellect was the ibis-headed Thoth. He created hieroglyphics, wrote mystical manuscripts, computed the days of the year, and documented the judgment of the dead in his capacity as scribe of the gods. His connection to the moon gave time itself rhythm and measure, complementing Ra's solar reign. Thoth's involvement frequently used his words, not swords, to settle divine disputes, proving the superiority of wisdom over force. Thoth, who was revered by both scribes and magicians, represented the Egyptian view that magical skill and reading were linked avenues to power. Few goddesses evoked more conflicting feelings than Hathor, the goddess of beauty, love music, and joy, who when angered could change into the ferocious lioness Sekhmet. The cow-headed Hathor welcomed the departed to the hereafter in her kind nature, providing them with sustenance through her heavenly milk. She delivered joy via dance and music, drunkenness through wine and beer, and satisfaction through motherhood and sexuality. However, in a bloodlust that the gods themselves found difficult to control, she almost wiped off mankind when Ra released her as Sekhmet to punish human disobedience. Hathor's dual nature served as a potent reminder that the same heavenly source frequently gives rise to both creative and destructive forces. Mart, the goddess who represented justice, truth, and cosmic order, counterbalanced Hathor's intense desire. Mart was rarely an active character in mythology, in contrast to the spectacular stories of other gods. Rather, she represented a concept so abstract that it was essential to all creation. Mart was shown as a lady with an ostrich feather on her head, symbolizing the perfect condition of life, balanced, harmonious, and morally upright. The departed thought their hearts would weigh against Mayat's feather in the judgment chamber, while the pharaohs claimed to rule in accordance with her. The Egyptians thought that without Mayat, the universe would return to its original state of chaos. There were several smaller gods that oversaw all facets of existence in addition to these powerful ones. Divine protection was introduced into the homes of common Egyptians through household gods such as Tauret, the pregnant hippopotamus goddess who protected mothers, and Bez, a dwarf deity with a lion's mane who protected women during childbirth and children from nightmares. Regional devotion was strong for local deities like Azknum, the ram-headed potter of Elephantine, or Sobek, the crocodile deity of the Fayum, Heka, or magical Might Renenutet, or harvest plenty. Shay or fate were all personifications of abstract ideas, the practice of syncretism, the blending of gods with similar qualities or roles was what made Egyptian religion so flexible. After Thebes became the capital, Amun, once a little-known air deity, became the national hero. He then merged with Ra to form Amun-Ra, monarch of the gods. Similarly, goddesses often collaborated to symbolize many facets of divine feminine power, such as Mut-Sekhmet Bastet. These combinations showed that the Egyptians understood that divine reality might appear in several complementary forms at the same time, rather than causing theological confusion. Egyptian gods' ties with animals have frequently been misinterpreted as archaic animal worship. They actually stood for a highly developed symbolic system. The gods were transcendent entities whose nuanced qualities could be conveyed through animal iconography, not creatures. The falcon's quick flight and sharp vision symbolized Horus's vigilant kingship. Thoth's piercing mind was prompted by the ibis' probing beak. In a pre-literate civilization, the combination of these animal characteristics with human bodies produced visual theology, instantly recognizable divine qualities. Every deity kept a unique cult center where it was thought that their presence would be most potent. Heliopolis worshipped Ra-Adi Abydos, worshipped Osiris, Memphis worshipped Tar Thebes, worshipped Amun, and Philae worshipped Isis. These temples were the residences of the gods, where everyday rites upheld cosmic order rather than just being sites of devotion. Priests cleaned, fed, clothed, and performed complex rituals on heavenly sculptures said to contain the god's key or spiritual essence. Humans become vital contributors to cosmic continuity by taking part in these rites and helping to preserve creation itself. The gods of Egypt were neither simple personifications nor remote abstractions. They were part of a sophisticated celestial civilization that both reflected and went beyond human existence. The Egyptians established connections with these supernatural energies via myth, ritual art, and architecture, recognizing in them both models for human potential and patterns of natural forces. For 3 millennia, Egyptian civilization was supported by the framework these gods who were at times magnificent, at other times friendly, and always complex, provided for comprehending life. The story of Osiris, a tale of treachery, devotion, retribution, and resurrection that profoundly influenced Egyptian conceptions of monarchy. The afterlife and cosmic order was the most important of all the stories interwoven throughout Egyptian mythology. The Osiris cycle has been passed down to us in a comparatively complete form, mostly through Plutarch's narrative in his work on Isis and Osiris, but also through a variety of Egyptian textual and artistic sources spanning 3 millennia, in contrast to many Egyptian myths that are only known through fragmentary allusions. The story starts in ancient Egypt when gods were still ruling the land. Osiris inherited the throne from his godly predecessors and became Egypt's first monarch. He was the son of Gabe Earth and Nut Sky. Osiris proved to be a cultural hero who revolutionized Egyptian culture rather than a remote ruler. He brought the production of grain and grapes, created religious customs, gave people laws, and taught them the techniques of agriculture. Egypt thrived under his kind leadership during a golden period when Maat was king, and there was no hunger, conflict, or injustice. At his side was his sister wife Isis, whose magical abilities and wisdom matched Osiris's gentle might. They brought prosperity to the area and served as models for human marriages, embodying the perfect heavenly pair. However, their brother Set, whose complicated reasons included personal ambition, hatred of Osiris's fame, and yearning for Isis, became envious of their peaceful rule. Subsequent interpretations proposed that this competition had a cosmic component. Naturally, Osiris, who stood for the lush Nile and its yearly flood that provides life, was opposed by Set, who was the king of the desert. Set summoned Osiris and 72 conspirators to a sumptuous meal where his deadly scheme took place. Set displayed a beautifully constructed chest during the celebrations and declared that he would give it to whichever it fit the best. The visitors tried the chest unsuccessfully, one by one. Unaware that the chest had been exactly sized to fit his physique, Osiris lay down within when it was his time. Set and his accomplices slammed the lid shut, sealed it with molten lead, and threw it into the Nile as soon as Osiris lay down within. Osiris, the victim of the first known fratricide in history, died in this way, changing his status from earthly monarch to Lord of the Hereafter. Isis was devastated to hear of her husband's murder, but she was also resolved to retrieve his body and perform the appropriate funeral rites necessary for life beyond death. After chopping off a strand of hairdressing in mourning and transforming into a predatory bird, Isis set off on an unrelenting quest that would lead her across Egypt and beyond. Her cries were so potent that they even caused Ra, the sun god, to send Anubis, a celestial messenger, to aid her in her search. The chest had been transported by the seas to Byblos, a coastal city in Phoenicia, which Isis ultimately located. The chest had been stuck in a tamarisk tree there, which grew so quickly that the Byblos monarch had it felled and turned into a pillar for his palace, thereby enshrining Osiris in his royal home. Isis was able to obtain authorization to retrieve the chest and bring it back to Egypt by using her divine intuition and diplomatic skills. However, the tale was far from over. Set was furious to learn that Osiris's corpse had been reclaimed by Isis. Believing that this dissection would prevent any resurrection, he grabbed the body and tore it into 14 pieces, which he then dispersed around Egypt. Among the myth's numerous astronomical elements, this deed symbolically paralleled the 14 days that the moon wanes from full to new. Unfazed Isis headed out once more to retrieve her husband's dispersed pieces, this time accompanied by her sister Nephthys. In a papyrus canoe, the two deities searched Egypt's marshes and riverbanks. In order to explain the origin of several sacred locations around Egypt, they constructed shrines at each area where they discovered a fragment of Osiris. In other stories, they found 13 parts, and the only one that was missing was the phallus, which was eaten by Nile fish, and later made prohibited for priests to consume. In order to represent Osiris's enduring creative ability, even after death, Isis fashioned a new phallus out of gold. With the help of Anubis, Isis restored Osiris's corpse, dressed him in linen bandages to create the first mummy, and carried out burial ceremonies using her unmatched magical knowledge. Isis briefly brought Osiris back to life using complex rites and potent incantations, allowing him to produce a son who would seek revenge on his father and retake the kingdom. Horus was created by this miraculous post-mortem pregnancy. His name, which means the distant one, alludes to either his falcon-like appearance soaring over the sky or to his creation after his father had become distant in death. Isis escaped to the Nile Delta wetlands, where she concealed in the thickets of Chemist papyrus, knowing that Set would try to murder this rightful heir. She nurtured her kid in secret there, away from Set's persistent searches among malarial marshes and crocodile-infested rivers. His early years were fraught with dangers. Because the holy infant was in danger from illnesses, snake bites, and scorpion stings. A wealth of magical writings that attempted to heal children by equating them with the baby Horus were created. Every time her son was in danger, Isis utilized her magical abilities to save him occasionally with the help of other gods like Thoth, who offered insight on how to heal. Horus trained in warfare and divine power as he matured into a man, readying himself for the eventual encounter with Set. Horus came out of hiding to take his inherited reign when he was old enough. What transpired was not a straightforward conflict, but rather a protracted legal and physical conflict known to the Egyptians as the contentions of Horus and Set, which are recorded in books such as the Chester Beatty Papyrus, the Fuin, and shown on Egyptian temple walls. According to some tales, this epic battle lasted 80 years and included both court cases before the heavenly tribunal and actual fighting. The gods themselves split, with some endorsing Set's assertion that he was entitled to the throne by virtue of his might and expertise, while others backed Horus's justifiable claim. Deities such as Thoth and Isis steadfastly supported Horus, but Ra often faltered and occasionally favored his older offspring Set. There were several instances of violence, deceit, and even sexual confrontation during the war. In one very startling instance, Set tried to sexually control Horus, but Horus was able to capture Set's semen in his hand, which Isis then threw into the marshes. In retribution, Isis assisted Horus in gathering his own semen and applied it to lettuce leaves that Set had inadvertently eaten. This humiliation, when it was found, seriously undermined Set's claim to supremacy. In another well-known instance, Set and Horus engaged in direct battle with Set, tearing out Horus's left eye, and Horus removing Set's testicles. The renowned Wedjot eye, a potent emblem of healing and protection in Egyptian culture, was created when Thoth miraculously healed Horus's eye. In a show of filial piety, Horus then presented his father Osiris with the recovered eye. This gave Osiris a brief boost in the underworld and established the legendary standard for offering ceremonies. In the end, the divine tribunal decided in favor of Horus, in part because of a persuasive letter from the now deceased Osiris. While Set was either exiled to the desert or, in other stories, reconciled and granted control over distant kingdoms and the desert areas, Horus was granted the throne of Egypt in the final judgment. The foundational framework for Egyptian royalty was formed by this resolution. Every live pharaoh was regarded as Horus's embodiment, while every ruler who passed away was associated with Osiris. Osiris, meanwhile, took on his everlasting duties as judge of the dead king, of the Duat, and ruler of the underworld. He was the ideal adjudicator for departed spirits, since he had been through death himself. In contrast to living restoration, his own resurrection did not bring him back to terrestrial existence. Instead, he stayed in the underworld, served as a model for all Egyptians who desired eternal life, allowing them to become Osiris after death by appropriate mummification, burial rites similar to those conducted for Osiris, and moral behavior in accordance with Ma'at. The impact of the Osiris story on Egyptian daily life went well beyond the realm of religion. Parts of the narrative were reenacted every year, especially in Abydos, where it was believed that Osiris's head was buried. Through the prism of the tale, agricultural cycles were understood, with the growing grain symbolizing Osiris's resurrection, and the tears of Isis signifying the life-giving Nile River. While amulets fashioned like Osiris's backbone, the Djed pillar offered magical protection based on the god's capacity for rebirth. Funerary customs for everyone from pharaohs to commoners followed patterns set out in the tale. The Osiris story is especially noteworthy since it thoroughly addresses issues that affect all people. It addresses existential anxieties, death, dismemberment, and oblivion, and provides hope, resurrection, everlasting life, and divine justice. It also explains natural events, the Nile flood, agricultural cycles, celestial motions, and develops social institutions, kingship, succession, and justice. The Egyptians were able to bridge the gap between the impersonal forces of nature and the human need for meaning by using this one cycle of story to grasp both cosmic patterns and personal fate. The story's poignant themes: the slain innocent, the distraught widow, the orphaned son seeking justice, the victory of reason over force, and above all, the assurance that death itself may be defeated with the right steps and divine intervention, remain potent even now. Even though the ancient Egyptian society is now gone, the Osiris myth nevertheless retains resonance in our culture, demonstrating how deeply it spoke to our deepest fears and desires. The daily voyage of Ra, a cosmic drama that unfolded in the sky and functioned as the most obvious expression of divine order, was equally fundamental to Egyptian cosmology as the Osiris myth, which tackled the mysteries of death and regeneration. The sun was more than just an astronomical phenomenon to the ancient Egyptians. It was a living deity whose motions governed time, supported life, and illustrated the never-ending cycle of existence. Rich iconography and ceremonial practices that dominated Egyptian religious life were the result of this solar theology, which evolved into one of the most complex mythical systems in antiquity. The Egyptians saw the birth of Khepri, the scarab-headed embodiment of the rising light every morning as the eastern horizon grew brighter. Khepri was observed rolling the sun disk across the sky, representing the idea of spontaneous birth and emergence, much like the revered dung beetle that rolls balls of excrement that hold its eggs. The Egyptian term Kepa, which means to come into existence, is the source of his name and perfectly captures the sun's daily rebirth. Every sunrise was seen by the Egyptians as a miniature version of the original creation, a victory of order over chaos and darkness. Khepri changed into Ra, at his strongest, ruling the daylight sky as the sun rose higher. Ra viewed his creation from his solar bark, known as the Manjet boat of millions of years, which provided light warmth and the circumstances required for all life. This trip across space wasn't taken alone. Heka, the force of magic. Hu, the divine utterance. Sia, the divine vision. And occasionally, Thoth the navigator were all part of Ra's divine retinue. Collectively, they stood for the attributes that allowed divine will to appear in the universe. The life cycle was symbolized by the sun's voyage across the sky, which included a strong ascension in youth, a majestic zenith in maturity, and a slow decline in old age. Ra started to age during the afternoon and became the setting sun Adam, who sank toward the western horizon. In his role as Ra Atum, he manifested as an old man, still powerful, but with diminishing strength, symbolizing the inevitable decline toward death that even the most powerful creatures must endure. The Egyptians' fascination with life cycles and regeneration was strengthened by this daily visual reminder of mortality. However, sunset did not represent God's death to the Egyptians. Instead, it was the start of his most dangerous and important adventure. Ra boarded a second boat, the Mesektet evening bark, when night fell, in order to traverse the perilous Duat underworld. This midnight trip symbolized both the human soul's journey after death and the sun's unseen passage beneath the ground, and it was extensively described in funerary works such as the Book of Gates. That which is in the underworld and the Amduat. In accordance with the 12 hours of the night, the Duat was split up into 12 sections, each of which had its own geography, population, and difficulties. Ra came across both comrades and adversaries as he moved through these hours. Deceased souls who had attained vindication bathed in his revitalizing light guardian spirits held watch over chaotic forces, and benevolent deities dragged his boat with ropes. Ra's perpetual cycle of rebirth was the ultimate afterlife ambition for many Egyptians, and the fortunate dead may physically board the solar bark to join his retinue. The most spectacular part of this nighttime adventure was when Ra faced Apophis, also known as Apep, a gigantic snake that represented chaos and non-existence at the darkest hour of the night. Apophis was anti-creation itself, the force that threatened to return all existence to primordial chaos, in contrast to the gods who stood for elements of creation. Every night, Apophis tried to stop Ra's trip by either coiling around Ra to smother his holy light or consuming the waters in which the solar bark traveled. The underlying struggle of existence against entropy and destruction was symbolized by this cosmic conflict. Ra used his heavenly allies, especially Set, who was the ideal enemy for the Chaos Serpent, due to his chaotic yet strong nature, to defeat Apophis. The gods in Ra's company would fight Apophis, slicing him to pieces with spears and knives. However, Apophis could never be totally eradicated, much like chaos itself. He regenerated every night so that the fight could start over, highlighting the constant attention to detail needed to preserve cosmic order. Ra started his revival after this pivotal encounter. He momentarily united solar and chthonic regenerating abilities as he fused with Osiris in the late hours of the night. Through this magical marriage, Ra was able to offer essential light to the departed, who resided in the underworld, while also absorbing its revitalizing powers. A superb representation of Egyptian religious syncretism and the interdependence of all regenerative processes was produced by the meeting of these two great gods, one of whom stood for heavenly cycles and the other for terrestrial regeneration. Ra was prepared for rebirth after completing his metamorphosis back into Capri at the 11th hour. Ra's shifting forms during the night, which included an old man in the evening, a ram-headed god at midnight, and a scarab beetle at morning, vividly highlighted the journey's transformational aspect. The sun deity was usually shown as a baby inside a solar disk, waiting to be reborn into the day sky. As he reached the eastern horizon, the sky goddess Nut, who had eaten the sun at dark and reborn it at morning, was sometimes portrayed as the source of this rebirth. Egyptian conceptions of time were significantly influenced by the solar cycle. The sun's daily trip illustrated cyclical time, which is everlasting recurrence with the potential for renewal, in contrast to linear time, which had unrepeatable instances. This cosmic design offered solace in a world where human existence was frequently brief and uncertain. Maybe human souls may overcome the dangers of death and experience rebirth if even the great sun god had to go into darkness, but always came back. This solar symbolism was included into the construction of Egyptian temples. On important days, the rising sun could illuminate the interior sanctuaries of many temples that were oriented on an east-west axis. The path of the sun was reflected in the daily rites at the temple. Offerings peaked at noon doors, opened at sunrise, and evening rituals got ready for the sun's journey into the night. To help Ra in his struggles against chaos, priests carried out complex ceremonies showing how religious activity was viewed as real involvement in cosmic upkeep. Ra's theological significance resulted in many syncretistic pairings with other deities over the years. He became Amun-Ra, a transcendent solar deity who fused the visibility of sunlight with the invisibility of air by uniting with the secret creator god of Thebes. In order to highlight his control over the horizons where day and night meet, he combined elements of Horus to become Ra-Harakti, Ra-Horus of the horizons. He brought the primal creator and the setting sun together as Atum-Ra. Ra's solar symbolism was able to retain his fundamental qualities while incorporating extra divine elements because to these theological advancements. The solar cycle's capacity to serve as a visible daily reminder of God's presence and the dependability of cosmic order was perhaps most important to common Egyptians. The sun's consistent return each morning provided concrete proof that the cosmos remained essentially orderly despite seeming turmoil in a world full of uncertainty, disease, agricultural failure, and political upheaval. If the sun god could defeat the snake of chaos every night, then with the right steps and divine support, people could also conquer their obstacles. Ra's trip provided the dead with a model and tools for surviving the afterlife. Many of the spells in the Book of the Dead were designed to assist the dead in joining Ra's group, changing with him, or navigating the underworld by using solar mythological knowledge of its topography. The objective was to become one with the everlasting renewal that characterized Egyptian conceptions of a blissful afterlife, not only to watch Ra's unending cycle. The Egyptians' most potent emblem of the triumph of order over chaos, life over death, and existence over nothingness was the sun's daily victory over darkness. The sun's unwavering return provided a cosmic constant in a world where pharaohs died, civilizations rose and fell, and individual lives passed like shadows. It was a divine promise that even though everything must eventually go dark, rebirth is always possible for those who prepare themselves and align themselves with the ever-changing rhythms of creation. The idea that underpinned all Egyptian mythology and religious practice was so essential that the Egyptians thought the cosmos would stop working without it. This was the cosmic order principle, a phrase that meant justice, harmony, balance, truth, order, and righteousness all at once. This idea was more than only a philosophical notion. It was personified as a goddess who personified the fundamental cosmic order created at creation and the moral basis of Egyptian civilization. Without an understanding of this fundamental idea that brought together Egyptian politics, ethics, cosmology, and ideas about the afterlife into a cohesive worldview, no aspect of Egyptian philosophy can be completely comprehended. The creation of right order, the way the universe was supposed to operate, was the Creator God's main accomplishment when He first created it out of primordial chaos. This cosmic principle was demonstrated by the orderly rhythms of the Earth's separation from the sky, the regular motion of celestial bodies, the yearly flooding of the Nile, and the passing of the seasons. Day and night life and death development and decay, all of these opposites were in harmony for the cosmos to work. The Egyptians understood these as complementary elements of a harmonious whole. rather than opposing forces. These interactions were guided by this basic reality, which preserved the delicate equilibrium that allowed creation to continue. As a goddess, this idea manifested as a lady with wings that symbolized her all-encompassing nature, and a woman with an ostrich feather on her head. She was rarely an active character in Egyptian storytelling, in contrast to deities who were frequently involved in dramatic narratives. Her strength came from her pervasive influence as the basis of existence itself, not from particular miraculous deeds. According to some creation stories, she was the creator's ally from the start, acting more as the principle that made creation possible than as a formed entity. This heavenly order was in constant antagonism to Isfet chaos, deception, and disorder on a cosmic scale. The Egyptians saw creation as a continuous process that needed to be maintained against the forces of chaos that constantly threatened to destroy the ordered cosmos and return it to its original formlessness. Each morning was a win for law and order. Maintaining cosmic equilibrium was aided by each appropriate sacrifice and ceremony. Every decent human deed strengthened the ordered cosmos. On the other hand, each falsehood, self-centered action, and disturbance of peace bolstered the powers of Isfet and endangered the entire fabric of creation. Egyptian royal philosophy was a concrete manifestation of this cosmic battle. The pharaoh was in charge of upholding divine order in the human world and was the principal representative of cosmic truth on earth. A miniature representation of the goddess was given to the monarch during his coronation, signifying his duty to preserve her values. Phrases like "or who lives by justice" were common in royal titles. Pharaohs were frequently seen in temple scenes, giving a miniature representation of the cosmic order or divinity to the gods. This was a profoundly symbolic gesture that symbolized the king's fulfillment of his cosmic function by upholding justice, truth, and order in Egypt. The idea had a direct influence on Egyptian legal and governmental structures. To demonstrate their dedication to making fair decisions, viziers, who functioned as chief justices, wore miniature representations of the truth goddess. During court hearings, judges donned goddess insignia, and court officials were called priests of truth. The preservation of cosmic equilibrium was closely linked to the notion of impartial justice. In addition to being unfair to a single person, an unjust ruling represented a rift in the fabric of appropriate order that may have far-reaching effects. Ordinary Egyptians believed that living in accordance with divine order meant upholding harmonious relationships, speaking the truth, honoring gods and ancestors, taking care of family responsibilities, and carrying out one's social position with integrity. These principles were often highlighted in the instructions genre of Egyptian wisdom literature, which presented this cosmic principle as a useful guide for day-to-day living rather than as an unachievable ideal. For example, Tehotep's teachings advocated living in accordance with cosmic order, which linked modern Egyptians to an unbroken lineage that dates back to legendary times. Although it set ethical criteria, this universal law was different from later moral systems in that it placed more emphasis on balance and harmony than on outright bans. Maintaining appropriate proportions and connections in everything was the aim. Even qualities like generosity that people now would view as completely good have to be balanced. Just as likely to upset societal peace as selfishness would be excessive charity that left one's family in poverty. Emotions. Physical requirements. social connections, and religious observances were all included in this multifaceted perspective, which called for appropriate measurement and context. Egyptian afterlife beliefs, especially the crucial scene of the weighing of the heart ceremony, may have been the most dramatic expression of this idea. In the Hall of Two Truths, the feather of truth was on one side of a scale, while the deceased's heart, the center of Egyptian thought's intellect, passion, and moral character, was on the other. The departed was deemed to have a real voice and accepted into the everlasting paradise of the field of reeds if the heart and feather were completely balanced. The terrifying Amit, the devourer of hearts, would devour the heart if it turned out to be heavier than the feather, burdened by transgressions of cosmic order, leading to a second, irreversible death. This scenario of judgment, which is found in innumerable copies of the Book of the Dead, effectively demonstrated how the idea of global balance linked personal moral duty and cosmic order. The renowned negative confession, or declaration of innocence, was given by the departed before to the weighing. It listed several offenses against heavenly harmony that they had not committed. This extensive list illustrated how moral behavior influenced many facets of conduct, including social relationships, religious adherence, and personal integrity. The Egyptians realized that no human being could ever fully embody divine truth. They were more interested in living a life that was usually in accordance with cosmic order than they were in moral perfection. Osiris rendered the final judgment in the judgment scene, frequently alongside 42 divine assessors representing various facets of a moral life, while the deity Thirth recorded the scale's conclusion. Anubis would gently tip the scales, implying that heavenly judgment included a compassionate component that acknowledged human limitations. Whether one had primarily upheld or challenged the cosmic order, what counted was the whole weight of one's existence. This eternal judgment was a realistic issue that influenced everyday choices for the Egyptians rather than being a far-off religious concept. In non-royal graves, autobiographical inscriptions often stressed the deceased's commitment to truth. I did justly and talked truthfully. I provided clothing to the naked, drink to the thirsty, and nourishment to the hungry. I was a parent to the orphan and a husband to the widow. These weren't just boasting. They were necessary spiritual preparations that proved the deceased's eligibility for everlasting life by proving their conformity to the laws of the cosmos. Throughout Egypt's lengthy history, the ideas of justice and truth have changed while retaining their fundamental significance. Anxiety at the seeming victory of Isfet over moral harmony was expressed in literature during the turbulent First Intermediate Period, when social order broke down and central authority fell. Epua's warnings bemoaned the exclusion of truth, and Isfet, standing in the middle of the council room, described a society in which the affluent became poor. The poor grew rich, and old values seemed pointless. This essay illustrates how social stability and natural hierarchy were strongly linked to good order in Egyptian culture. Royal propaganda highlighted the pharaoh's role in restoring divine equilibrium following turmoil with the Middle Kingdom's return to order. Despite dismantling conventional pantheons, even this radical pharaoh later claimed to live by truth during the religious revolutions of Akhenaten's reign. The concept of cosmic equilibrium grew more closely associated with nationalist feeling in the latter years, when Egypt was subjected to foreign dominance. Upholding traditional Egyptian values in opposition to external influences. The fundamental idea persisted despite various modifications. Maintaining cosmic order needed appropriate conduct on both a personal and a regal level. This unifying principle's strength was found in its complexity. At the same time, it included cosmological issues, the way the cosmos works, social issues, proper human interaction, political issues, the foundation of royal power, moral dilemmas, individual conduct, religious convictions, and eternal needs. Egyptian culture accomplished a remarkable integration of ethics and cosmology by uniting both realms under a single overarching notion, whereby individual morality directly contributed to the upholding of global order. The amazing stability of Egyptian culture over 3 millennia can be explained by this comprehensive perspective. The idea of cosmic truth offered cultural continuity, an ethical and cosmic basis that remained identifiable from pre-dynastic periods through the Roman era, despite invasions, sporadic internal breakdowns, and steadily changing religion. The basic idea that people helped preserve cosmic order by leading honest lives was the same, even though particular religious forms evolved. The way this Egyptian idea brought together areas that we usually divide science and religion, ethics and physics, personal morality and cosmic functionality may have struck a chord with modern sensibilities the most. The cycle of seasons, the orderly motions of the stars, the predictable flooding of the Nile fair, governance, honest discourse, and the moral treatment of others all represented the same basic idea to the Egyptians. A deep spiritual idea that rooted individual human lives inside the vast cosmic order, living by divine truth, meant connecting oneself with the fundamental essence of the cosmos. This idea was used practically in administrative and legal frameworks. Court officials were actually referred to as priests of truth, and they represented their dedication to right results throughout hearings by donning little amulets of the goddess. When swearing an oath, the deity was summoned as a witness, and legal papers ended with statements referencing these concepts. A system where justice was not only human convention, but also participation in divine order, was established by this fusion of cosmic principle and pragmatic control. Even the collecting of taxes was designed not just to finance governmental activities, but also to preserve a balanced distribution of resources. Through exquisite symbolism, the goddess's creative portrayal communicated her essential essence. Usually portrayed as a lady with a single ostrich feather on her head, the same feather that is used to weigh hearts, her human appearance, which lacked many heavenly characteristics, highlighted her approachability. Her straightforward portrayal reflected her essential character in contrast to gods shown with ornate crowns or animal attributes. The ostrich feather itself represented both air breath, the vital component of life given at creation that appropriately returned to the heavenly source by true living, and lightness in contrast to the heavy heart of the unrighteous. The idea was extended from ritual contexts into practical wisdom by literary works. The structuring premise of the instruction genre of literature was often oriented on virtuous living. Texts such as the Instruction of Tehotep, which advise that great is truth, have a lasting impact. Not since Osiris's time has it been disturbed. These educational materials provide helpful advice on how to put these ideas into practice in a variety of real-world contexts, such as family dynamics, corporate interactions, courtroom conduct, and religious adherence. Egyptian wisdom literature established a smooth link between sensible conduct and universal order by enclosing common ethics in this cosmic idea. There are notable similarities and differences between the Egyptian conception of cosmic order and ethical systems from other ancient societies. In contrast to Mesopotamian morality, which placed a strong emphasis on following arbitrary heavenly orders, the Egyptian perspective portrayed moral action as being in line with the essence of reality. This method included ethical ideas into cosmic structure before human interpretation, in contrast to subsequent Greek philosophical ethics that concentrated on human reasoning. However, it shared the idea that harmonious cosmic ties were mirrored in appropriate social interactions with Confucian Li. Vedic Dharma also included the notion that personal behavior has an impact on the whole equilibrium. This Egyptian precept was especially potent because it opposed abstract intellectualization that was separated from experience. It was a reality to be performed through appropriate discourse, ceremonial accuracy, ethical behavior, and social harmony, rather than merely a philosophical idea to be debated. Instead of merely acknowledging cosmic order, the Egyptians understood that it needed ongoing participation. Simply believing in divine truth was not enough. It was embodied via honest character that could pass the judgment of the afterlife, and it was performed by correct living preserved through ritual activity and restored through just decisions. Egyptian culture was able to preserve exceptional cultural stability despite shifting historical conditions, thanks to its stress on the practical manifestation of cosmic principles. Certain theological statements developed when political regimes changed and foreign powers periodically took control. Throughout the 3 millennia of Egyptian history, the core idea of a cosmos, ruled by balance and truth, maintained continuity. A demonstration of how well this idea combined knowledge of the cosmos with pragmatic life in ways that had significance for generations of Egyptian experience. Ancient Egypt invested more resources, creative talent, and intellectual energy in preparing for the afterlife than any other culture in history. Egyptian material culture, from the enormous pyramids that still stand tall on the Giza Plateau to the simplest painted wooden coffin, was primarily concerned with guaranteeing life after death. Instead of being motivated by morbidity, this obsession with the hereafter was fueled by an emotional affirmation of life so profound that Egyptians refused to accept its end instead, creating one of the most complex and optimistic views of life after death in history. Over the course of their lengthy existence, Egyptian ideas about the afterlife underwent substantial change, although several core ideas were largely the same. The intricate Egyptian conception of human makeup was essential to their comprehension. Egyptians saw the individual as a composite of several parts, including the physical body, the Kai, the Bai, the Shut, the Ren, and the Akaij, rather than a straightforward body-soul dualism. Every element was essential to life in the afterlife, which is why Egyptian burial customs required such intricate preparations. The vital energy that separated the living from the dead at birth was symbolized by the Kai, which is sometimes mistranslated as double. or life force. Even after death, it needed to be fed, which is why Egyptian tombs had such large food offerings and why recipes for offering were created that were said to mysteriously supply food. In the event that the mummified body died, statues erected in tombs provided the Kai with a tangible anchor in the material world and acted as backup residences. The movable part of the personality that could roam between realms was symbolized by the Bai, which was usually shown as a bird with a human head. After passing away, the Bai might spend the day outside the tomb to see familiar sights, take in the sunshine, or make offerings before going back to the body at night. Egyptians were able to reconcile the seemingly incompatible wishes for the departed to have freedom of movement and to stay preserved in the tomb thanks to this idea. In the afterlife, these components came together to make the transformed, powerful soul that might live among the stars and gods. The ultimate aim of funeral preparations was to become an ark, which meant not just surviving, but also attaining a changed divine condition. Written with the crested ibis hieroglyph, the word ark conveyed a sense of efficacy and brightness, implying the bright, strong state of people who had made it through the passage to endless life. Numerous magical and ceremonial preparations were necessary due to the perilous trek to this exalted realm. Immediately following death, the dead had to traverse the perilous terrain of the underworld, which was inhabited by terrifying guards, password-protected gates, and mysterious creatures that might either facilitate or obstruct advancement. In this field, information was power. Understanding the terrain of the underworld, knowing the names of gatekeepers, and having the right spells may make the difference between a second death of irreversible extinction and eternal life. In order to supply this crucial information, Egyptians created progressively more complex funeral writings. The Old Kingdom, royal pyramids' inner walls were covered with hundreds of spells that were intended to assist the monarch in ascending to the celestial world according to the pyramid scriptures, which are the earliest religious writings known to man. An early idea of a regal afterlife that was mostly connected to the heavens, especially the imperishable circumpolar stars that never set below the horizon, signifying perpetual, unchanging existence, was expressed in these works. The coffin writings, which adapted royal funeral magic for non-royal usage, appeared during the Middle Kingdom, as aspirations for a hereafter became more democratic. These spells, which were mostly written on coffins, enabled common Egyptians to become powerful spirits and travel the underworld. These developed into the Book of the Dead by the time of the New Kingdom, or more precisely, the Book of Coming Forth by Day. These were usually inscribed on papyrus scrolls that were put with the mummy. Its roughly 200 spells, vividly illustrated, offered a whole magical tool set for success in the hereafter, including breathing air in the underworld, stopping the heart from testifying against its owner, assuring sufficient sustenance, and changing into animals to overcome hurdles. New Kingdom royal tombs were embellished with intricate underworld guidebooks to go along with these portable literature. The 12 divisions of the underworld are mapped out in works such as the Amduan, the Book of Gates, and the Book of Caverns. These divisions correlate to the 12 hours of night and describe the sun and God's nocturnal trip, which the departed desired to merge with. These writings blended deep theological insights on metamorphosis, rebirth, and the cyclical cycle of life with useful navigational advice. The departed stood judgment before Osiris and 42 divine assessors in the Hall of Two Truths, which was the final test of the afterlife journey. The heart, which is the seat of conscience and character, was weighed against the feather of Mot at the crucial weighing of the heart right. Depending on the result, one would either experience oblivion or a glorious afterlife. This scene, ascent, judgment, effectively linked moral behavior in this life to opportunities in the next, generating a useful incentive for moral action that strengthened social cohesion. In Egyptian philosophy, the several afterlife places that awaited people who passed judgment were frequently combined, rather than viewed as mutually incompatible. Without having to struggle with the challenges of earthly farming, the departed might plow, sow, and reap eternally plentiful harvests in the field of reeds Aru, which provided an idealized representation of Egyptian agricultural life. One may obtain heavenly sustenance at the field of offerings, which offered an unending feast, while venturing forth by day enabled the most fortunate to return to the earthly realm and partake in its joys during the day. Joining Ra's solar bark allowed them to participate in the perpetual cosmic cycle. The Egyptians created the most advanced human body preservation methods in the world to enable this intricate afterlife. From straightforward desert graves in which bodies were naturally dehydrated by hot sand, mummification developed into a complex 70-day process that included evisceration, desiccation with natron salt, application of resin, wrapping with hundreds of meters of linen, and the placement of protective amulets in between the layers. The mummy was ritually brought back to life during the final opening of the mouth rite, regaining its senses and capacity to accept offerings. The BA's nightly return, which eventually reunited with other spiritual components, was permanently anchored by this preserved body. The importance of afterlife beliefs to Egyptian society is demonstrated by the significant amount of money spent on tomb preparation, especially by non-elite Egyptians. Tombs were designed to be eternal homes, furnished with all the necessities for a pleasant life, including clothes, furniture, toiletries, food, drink games, and religious and entertaining books. The emphasis of tomb decor was on happy earthly scenes. Feasts, hunting, fishing, and family get-togethers that the departed hoped to continue to enjoy in a mystical way. In the meanwhile, sculptures gave the vehicle various homes and inscriptions kept the crucial name intact, without which one could not be recognized for sacrifices or remembered by the living. Burial was not the end of the family's responsibilities to the departed. It was expected of the living to keep up tomb offerings, recite the names of the deceased, and carry out rites that allowed them to continue existing in the afterlife. In exchange, well-off departed family members may utilize their supernatural powers to defend surviving family members or make pleas to higher gods on behalf of the living. With practical responsibilities flowing both ways, this mutually beneficial connection established a community that transcended the line between the living and the dead. Egyptian ideas on the afterlife changed significantly over time, becoming more sophisticated and democratic, yet they remained remarkably optimistic at their core. The Egyptian afterlife promised the prospect of a fully realized, even expanded existence, in contrast to the dark, murky underground life seen in Mesopotamian beliefs, or the early Hebrew idea of Sheol. Because the Egyptians believed that true life might continue endlessly after death, with the right preparation, the blessed dead were usually referred to as the living ones. Egyptian culture was greatly influenced by this afterlife idea, which permeated everything from everyday customs and ethics to architecture and art. Since one's heart would physically testify about one's conduct before the heavenly court. The promise of eternal life encouraged commitment to Ma'at. Contributions to the family and community during life were fostered by the desire to be remembered by the living, while aristocratic rivalry for striking monuments spurred architectural innovation. The need for a furnished grave encouraged creativity and artisan specialization. Most importantly, Egyptian afterlife beliefs offered a framework for facing mortality that prioritized preparedness over dread, continuity over rupture, and the final victory of life over death. Egyptians developed a cultural response to mortality's universal issue by viewing death as a transforming journey rather than an end, which enabled them to appreciate life's joys while realizing that it is only fleeting. Their complex mortuary culture is a passionate declaration that life, when well planned for, should not end with the failing of the body, rather than a fixation with death. The Egyptians thought that the gods themselves had ruled the Nile Valley before mortal pharaohs took control of it. This legendary period, known as Zep Tepi, or first time, served as the basis for Egyptian political theology's mythology and set the precedent for all succeeding monarchies. Thousands of years of heavenly reign were followed by semi-divine kings, and then completely human pharaohs, according to the Turin King List and other ancient documents. The foundational framework that validated the institution of royalty throughout Egyptian civilization was provided by this legendary prehistory, which was not considered merely a fable, but rather real history. Depending on the theological tradition, the creator deity himself, whether called Atum-Ra or Ptah, was the first to enter the divine dominion. The creator created the archetypal pattern of divine authority by ruling as the first monarch after creating the universe and its basic order. Ra's rule was often portrayed as a time of perfect harmony during which people and gods coexisted more closely. There was no illness, conflict, or deception, and everything was made to precisely represent God's will. Egyptians were always looking back to a flawless past rather than ahead to future advancements, because this paradisiacal age set the standard by which all other times were judged. When people started hatching plans against old Ra, this beautiful condition finally began to collapse. Ra discovered humanity's preparations for rebellion and called a celestial council to decide how to punish them according to the tale of the heavenly cow that has been preserved on a number of royal tombs in the New Kingdom. The goddess Hathor assumed the ferocious shape of Sekhmet on his behalf and started to massacre the disobedient mortals. Ra had to deceive Sekhmet by turning beer crimson to mimic blood when he eventually felt sorry for mankind and made the decision to stop the carnage. Sekhmet drank the beer until she was too drunk to stop her rampage. Ra chose to leave direct earthly authority after becoming disillusioned with human ingratitude. He rode the heavenly cow goddess Nut to the skies. He restructured cosmic administration before leaving, giving Osiris reign over humanity and designating Thoth as his vizier and emissary on earth. The paradigm of transferred divine authority that would ultimately define Egyptian royalty was formed by this mythological transfer of power. The pharaoh ruled as the appointed emissary of heavenly authority rather than on his own. Osiris's rule turned into another legendary golden era, teaching people the arts of civilization, agriculture, and correct religious devotion. His reign was the epitome of the perfect monarch, fostering justice and plenty over exploitation, and ruling with wisdom rather than force. His execution by Set marked the end of this peaceful era and the beginning of the legendary cycle of upheaval and reconciliation that would serve as the spiritual model for comprehending political shifts throughout Egyptian history. After Osiris passed away and his son was conceived after his death, Horus reached adulthood and asserted his due inheritance. All claims to royal succession and legitimacy have their mythical roots in the subsequent conflict between Horus and Set for Egypt's crown. Horus set the basic precedent that all Egyptian kings would follow when he eventually won the throne as his inheritance, while his deceased predecessor came to be associated with Osiris. The current king was Horus in human form. Legendary dynasties of semi-divine creatures followed these totally divine kings. Horus's followers were characterized as partially divine monarchs who ruled between human monarchy and direct divine authority. These might be real pre-dynastic kings whose accomplishments were later mythologized according to archaeological evidence. Every historical dynasty asserted a link to these semi-divine forebears, establishing an uninterrupted line of power that extended all the way back to the gods. In addition to providing cultural context, this legendary past served as the religious underpinning for the system of pharaonic governance. The Egyptian pharaohs were literally divine, with the deity Horus physically being on earth in human form, in contrast to their neighboring societies where kings can be characterized as being favored by the gods or adopted by deities. The core theological assertion that the living monarch represented divine presence made the pharaoh more than just a political ruler. Rather, he was a cosmic necessity whose rights and effective government upheld global order. This was not only symbolic hyperbole. From the earliest dynasties, royal titles, iconography, and ceremonies all demonstrated the divine aspect of pharaonic royalty. The 5 names in the pharaoh's titulary each alluded to a distinct facet of heavenly might. He is identified as the living manifestation of Horus by his Horus name, the Nebtai name, which links him to the upper and lower Egyptian goddesses of protection. His divine essence is emphasized by his moniker Golden Horus. The kings of Upper and Lower Egypt appended their names to the pre-Nomen throne. Son of Ra is the prefix added to the nomen's natal name. These were religious assertions that placed the monarch in the cosmic order and divine hierarchy, not just honorifics. Similarly, the pharaoh's divine position was conveyed through royal regalia. The monarch was connected with this resurrected deity by the crook and flail, which were taken from the iconography of Osiris. The flaming eye of Ra, which annihilated adversaries, was symbolized by the golden snake on the royal brow. The king's look was linked to that of Osiris via the fake beard. Even royal statues' iconic Egyptian pose, left foot front arms, straight eyes fixated on eternity, expressed supernatural attributes that went beyond earthly bounds. After being crowned, the new king was subjected to rites that changed him from a private person to a celestial being. The most significant event, which Egyptologists refer to as the Transfiguration Rite, since it was secret, entailed the complete identification of the mortal person with Horus. The monarch is described in coronation writings as being suckled by divine mothers, getting the breath of life from deities who make place for him in their midst, and receiving the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt straight from the hands of the gods. The pharaoh carried out rites necessary for cosmic upkeep throughout his rule. The most important was the daily temple ritual, which was carried out either by priests working specifically as royal representatives elsewhere or by individuals in the principal state temples. By approaching the holy image, breaking the seal of its temple, performing purifications, presenting gifts, and receiving heavenly benediction, the monarch ensured the continuation of the divine presence in Egypt and the normal functioning of the cosmos. This was essential cosmic activity that was necessary for the stability of creation, not just a celebration. The royal car, a divine aspect of monarchy that went beyond particular rulers, allowed the idea of divine kingship to become even more complicated by the new kingdom. The royal Kai, which persisted from one pharaoh to the next, symbolized the divine office of monarchy itself, in contrast to the personal Kai that every human has. In order to emphasize that pharaonic divinity involved both the particular king and the eternal institution he temporarily embodied, special temples known as mansions of the royal car were constructed where this divine essence could receive gifts and rites. When historical reality deviated from the ideal, the divine essence of kingship presented theological difficulties. Because the living Horus was conceived as male-female monarchs, such as Hatshepsut, had to be shown in official art with masculine characteristics despite their biological sex, in order to legitimize their authority. Foreign invaders, who became pharaohs, like as the Hyksos or later Persians, had to adopt Egyptian royal iconography and religion. Complex theological explanations, sometimes portrayed as reenactments of the Horus-Set battle, were necessary even during times of civil strife or split kingship, and eventually called for the restoration of correct order. Traditional ideas of divine kingship were drastically altered by Akhenaten's religious revolution, which presented perhaps the most profound theological challenge. As the only interpreter of divine intent, Akhenaten claimed exclusive access to the Aten or solar disk, whereas traditional pharaohs served as a bridge between mankind and other deities. His revolutionary theology established an unparalleled concentration of ecclesiastical and political authority by making the monarch and his family the exclusive conduit for heavenly grace. After his death, a strong return to conventional ideas of divine kingship caused this theological innovation to collapse, demonstrating that it was unsustainable. The core idea of pharaonic deity was relatively constant across 3 millennia, notwithstanding such times of innovation or disruption. The religious foundation remained in place even during Egypt's recurrent foreign dominance in the late period, while Roman emperors were shown on temple walls carrying out necessary rites in typical pharaonic attire. Greek Ptolemaic kings also embraced Egyptian royal regalia and religious responsibilities. Regardless of political reality, it was impossible to forsake the notion of divine monarchy due to its theological imperative for cosmic maintenance. The pharaoh's divine status did not grant the common Egyptians unrestricted authority or immunity from criticism. Within moral bounds, the idea of Ma'at limited lawful royal authority, while gloomy literature from unstable times publicly chastised rulers who failed their divine tasks. Wisdom books counseled monarchs on how to govern effectively. The ideal divine ruler guaranteed that divine favor materialized as wealth and security, upheld Ma'at, safeguarded Egypt from instability, and reigned justly. Even though he may still claim divine status, a pharaoh who fell short of these standards was seen as failing his cosmic role. Because of his divinity, the pharaoh was not only the ruler of Egypt, but also its primary priest, cosmic steward, and living example of just order, with heavenly blessings pouring via the pharaoh to preserve creation. The monarch maintained the connection between the world of the gods and the human world. One of the longest-lasting political structures in history was remarkably stable because to this religious framework, which allowed Egyptian royalty to withstand significant historical shifts while retaining its fundamental identity and legitimizing role across the ages. Beyond the mighty gods and goddesses that ruled Egyptian religion, there was a shadow world full of amazing creatures, powerful monsters, and otherworldly beings that represented the more perilous and chaotic facets of the universe. In Egyptian mythology, these animals, some fearsome, some protective, and many conflicted, played important roles as either forces that endangered or ironically supported cosmic order. These mysterious entities functioned at the edges of orderly life, in the liminal spaces between categories, and represented the eerie powers that both terrified and captivated the ancient Egyptians, in contrast to the primary deities who were worshipped in temples and regularly offered sacrifices. The most terrifying of these beings was Apophis, also known as Apep, the enormous snake that stood for complete chaos and non-existence. Apophis stood for anti-creation itself, the primordial void that threatened to obliterate all existence back into undifferentiated chaos, in contrast to Set, who represented essential but perilous natural phenomena like storms and desert heat. Every night, Apophis, who was described as a serpent of many coils, as long as the underworld itself, attacked Ra's solar boat in an effort to devour the sun and permanently destroy its life-giving light. Apophis was especially scary because he was immortal. In Egyptian mythology, the gods could be murdered or dismembered and then reassembled, but Apophis could never be destroyed. The snake was pierced, dismembered, burned, or restrained every night, only to reappear for the encounter the next night. This never-ending foe stood in for entropy itself, the propensity of organized systems to disintegrate that need ongoing attention to detail and effort to counter. By burning papyri with his name on them, stomping paintings of the snake, or stabbing wax effigies, the Egyptians symbolically destroyed Apophis's image via ceremonial execrations, magical techniques intended to help Ra fight chaos every night. Ammit, the devourer of hearts, endangered personal immortality, while Apophis threatened the survival of the cosmos. With the head of a crocodile, the front body of a lion, and the back body of a hippopotamus, this composite monster fused Egypt's most deadly creatures into one hideous whole. In the Hall of Two Truths, Ammit squatted next to the scales of judgment, anticipating with great anticipation the hearts that did not pass the weighing against Mot's feather. Consuming these hearts led to the second death, which was the most terrible destiny conceivable for Egyptians who had invested a great deal of money to guarantee endless life. It was not just physical death, but total spiritual destruction. It's interesting to note that Ammit was not viewed as malevolent or demonic in Egyptian theology, despite her scary role. Instead, she carried out a required cosmic role by removing the components that posed a harm to Maat due to their unethical behavior. Although she was never worshipped or offered sacrifices, she was consistently shown in temple and tomb art for generations, indicating her centrality in Egyptian ideas about the afterlife. Ammit's threat transformed abstract worries about cosmic order into a visceral fear of one's own annihilation, which in turn provided strong motivation for living an ethical life. The 7 scorpions that Isis flew with with the baby Horus, were among the more conflicted supernatural creatures. Despite being the goddess's agents and defenders, these magical arachnids were harmful to innocent onlookers due to their toxic nature. In a well-known instance, a lady who had turned down Isis's hospitality was bitten by scorpions, which compelled the benevolent goddess to utilize her magical abilities to heal the victim. This tale demonstrated how even benevolent supernatural beings may inflict collateral harm due to their perilous natures, reflecting the Egyptian understanding of natural hazards as occasionally required, but needing cautious handling. Ammit the Bone Eater was a terrifying demon that visited graves and threatened to devour the dead before they could fully turn into blessed spirits. Ammit stood for the indiscriminate threat of decay and degradation that even the well-prepared dead need magical protection against, in contrast to Ammit, who served cosmic justice. Spells created especially to ward against this monster were found in funerary literature, illustrating how Egyptian afterlife preparations addressed both the First Judgment and continuing spiritual dangers in the hereafter regions. Not every supernatural being posed a threat. The Bennu bird, a self-made creature connected to the sun, rising, and recurring rebirth, stood for positive change. When the Bennu was created, it was claimed to have soared over the primordial seas, its cry breaking the primordial quiet. It was described as a giant heron or similar long-legged water bird with gorgeous plumage. The Bennu would construct a nest that served as its funeral pyre every 500 years, which later Greek interpretations dubbed the phoenix. From this nest, the creature would emerge rejuvenated, offering a potent image of cyclical regeneration that was in perfect harmony with Egyptian ideas of perpetual return. Horus's four sons, Imseti-Hapi-Duamutef and Kibazenuef, were equally kind and guarded the mummified organs kept in canopic jars. These creatures, who are represented by the heads of humans, baboons, jackals, and falcons, respectively, acted as cosmic pillars that supported the four corners of the sky, while also preserving the essential organs required for life in the hereafter. Their dual role illustrated the Egyptian propensity to perceive links between the microcosm and the macrocosm, where guardians of individual bodies concurrently preserved more expansive cosmic systems. Some supernatural entities were in the gray area between great gods and minor spirits. Frog and serpent heads were used to emphasize the primeval, pre-ordered character of the Ogdoad of Hermopolis, 8 primordial beings that represented elements of pre-creation chaos. Even though these creatures existed before creation, they helped create the ordered world, showing that with the right guidance and control, even chaotic primordial forces may contribute to cosmic order. Egyptian homes had to deal with a lot of invisible things that needed to be managed magically. Protective figures, such as the hideous dwarf deity Bez, scared off evil spirits that preyed on sleeping humans, especially babies and pregnant women. Bez's intimidating features, including his bandy legs, jutting mouth, and lion's mane, performed apotropaic purposes. Even more repulsive forces fled from his ugly appearance. He was one of the most commonly seen supernatural figures in everyday Egyptian life, with his picture appearing on furniture, cosmetics, and amulets in ordinary houses. The roaming dead, known as Mut, who had not attained full afterlife status, posed a greater menace, in contrast to the properly prepared blessed dead. If these spirits are not placated or repulsed by appropriate magical means, they may inflict disease, nightmares, and bad luck. through the use of complex psychological strategies to manage supernatural concerns. Archaeologists have discovered letters to the dead that show how Egyptians bargained with potentially problematic deceased relatives, providing nourishment and remembering in exchange for protection rather than haunting. The Egyptian consciousness of supernatural peril extended to particular perilous periods during which adversary powers temporarily prevailed. Certain calendar days, designated as unlucky, necessitated extra vigilance and restricted activity. 5 epagomenal days were added to the 365-day calendar to complete the transitional interval between years. These days were particularly perilous because they damaged the usual cosmic order and gave chaotic forces more power. Ordinary Egyptians were able to survive these times of increased peril with the use of amulets and special protection rituals. A close analysis reveals a sophisticated cosmology that acknowledged both organized divine powers and more ambiguous, harmful supernatural forces. Despite the fact that modern popular culture frequently misrepresents ancient Egyptian religion as being dominated by animal worship or basic deities, the Egyptians had sophisticated strategies for dealing with these species, not only avoiding monsters, but incorporating them into a holistic worldview in which even dangerous creatures fulfilled essential cosmic roles. The Egyptians developed a spiritual technology for upholding order in the face of constant upheaval by navigating a world filled by forces beyond human control through ritual magic and moral behavior. The true ecological circumstances of ancient Egypt, where the little strip of lush land along the Nile was in perpetual conflict with the surrounding desert, were mirrored in this intricate supernatural ecosystem. In the same way that the Egyptians preserved agricultural order via constant irrigation and prudent control of natural forces, they preserved cosmic order through appropriate ceremonial interaction with both benign and harmful supernatural forces. Egyptian mythology's monsters and amazing creatures were not simple fantasies. Rather, they were intricate symbolic representations of the delicate equilibrium between chaos and order that characterized Egyptian life. In ancient Egypt's fluid cosmology, identities were malleable boundaries between categories were porous, and reality itself could be controlled with the right information and ceremonial behavior. As a basic principle of life change known in Egyptian as Kippa, the same word that constituted the name of the scarab-headed creator deity Khepri was evident in natural cycles such as the daily rebirth of the sun, the yearly flood of the Nile, and the transformation of tadpoles into frogs. From the gods themselves to those with enough magical understanding, this ability to undergo drastic changes in form or condition created a mythical framework where metamorphosis was not a creation of fiction, but rather a fundamental cosmic principle. The main transformational models came from the gods themselves. Ra transitioned between many regenerating forms throughout his nighttime underworld trek, first emerging as Khepri in the morning Ra, in the middle of the day, and Item in the evening. When the situation demanded violence, the goddess Hathor might take the shape of the devoted heavenly cow or change into the ferocious lioness Sekhmet, variously depicted as a lady arching over the globe, a celestial cow with the sun between her horns, or a sow eating her piglets. Nut the sky goddess reincarnated the stars every nightfall after consuming them each morning. These divine changes were interpreted as true metamorphoses that the gods experienced rather than merely symbolic representations. The gods Horus and Set fought one another in a shape-shifting contest in which Horus changed into a hippopotamus and Set changed back into the proper shape. Ra was forced to confess his actual identity in order to be healed when Isis turned a drop of the aging sun, which is God's saliva, into a poisonous snake that bit him in an attempt to discover his hidden name. The basic Egyptian idea that form was malleable rather than set even for the most powerful cosmic creatures was demonstrated by the innumerable other stories in which deities changed themselves or others as crucial narrative points. For people who had passed away and were looking for a life after death, the legendary concept of metamorphosis applied. Numerous spells that allowed the dead to change into different animals or beings were included in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, also known as the Book of Coming Forth by Day. The transformation into a falcon was made possible by spell 76, a hawk by spell 77, phoenix by spell 83, a heron by spell 84. Additional forms, such as a lotus divine light, a deity, or other advantageous forms, were made possible by other spells. These changes were not viewed as symbolic, but rather as real metamorphoses that the well-prepared departed may experience, enabling them to overcome obstacles in the afterlife by taking on suitable forms. The enchanted idea of becoming was expanded to include identity integration in addition to bodily alteration. A person may announce, "I am Osiris," or "I am Ra," and momentarily gain access to that deity's abilities and protection by performing the appropriate rite and incantation. By momentarily fusing their identity with a greater cosmic entity, ritual practitioners were able to partake in divine power through the concept known as Henmamet in Egyptian, which is often translated as identification or unification. For example, in order to obtain the divine wisdom required for appropriate mummification, the embalmer would say, "I am Anubis," during burial rites. This idea is notably present in Egyptian perceptions of sculptures and pictures. A statue was more than just a depiction of a person or god when it was properly activated through the opening of the mouth ritual. It was a legitimate container for their chai or life power that could accept sacrifices and bestow blessings. The Egyptian idea that appropriate knowledge and ritual could radically change an object's metaphysical character was demonstrated by the ceremony's transformation of inert material into a living vessel. The power of names and words was central to Egyptian ideas of change. Egyptians saw a name Ren as an integral part of a person's identity, in contrast to contemporary societies that frequently see names as meaningless labels. The narrative, where Isis poisoned Ra and made him divulge his hidden name in return for healing, serves as a dramatic example of the idea that knowing something's actual name gave one authority over it. Isis acquired some of Ra's power by learning this name, which explains why many gods concealed their real names. The Egyptian custom of having two names, a genuine name known only to close family members and a good one for public use, was explained by this idea, which also applied to people. The Memphite mythology, in which the creator deity Tar created the cosmos by combining the power of his heart intellect and tongue speech, was the pinnacle of the creative power of communication. Heka. The idea of creative utterance that is sometimes interpreted as magic was essential to Egyptian religion and their conception of reality. When said correctly, with the right knowledge and ceremonial purity, words have the power to change physical reality, cure sicknesses, ward off danger, change substances, and connect with otherworldly places. This was the correct application of natural cosmic rules, as perceived by the Egyptians, not supernatural in the contemporary sense. Every facet of Egyptian society was infused with Heka. Physical treatments were supplemented with verbal incantations that matched the patient with a god, usually Horus, who had experienced similar problems and been cured. Verbal formulations were used in agricultural activities to provide fertility and insect prevention. Even large-scale governmental initiatives, like as the construction of temples, started with ceremonial chants that elevated the work site from a common area to a hallowed one. The Egyptians viewed both verbal and material components as equally important components of effective action in a universe that responded to well-crafted words rather than viewing these techniques as distinct from practical activity. Egyptian magic was based on a number of fundamental ideas that demonstrated their deep comprehension of symbolic activity. The pars pro toto was one of the core ideas. The whole is represented by the component. A written name, a hairpiece, or a nail clipping may magically represent the full person, enabling either destructive or protective magic to influence a person through these interconnected components. This idea explains the meticulous protection of royal names, the removal of heads or legs from tomb pictures of hazardous monsters to counteract their power, and the ability of replacement magic with wax figurines to spread disease from a patient to the damaged substitute. Sympathetic correspondence. The notion that items with similar characteristics might influence one another over distance was another operational premise. Red materials such as carnelian or jasper were useful in treating blood diseases since they represented blood and life power. Reviving the dead may be aided by visions of the youthful sun god emerging. Certain cosmic powers were ignited by words written in particular colored inks. The Egyptian conception of a cosmos connected by networks of sympathetic connections that ritual experts may activate was mirrored in these relationships, which were not coincidental. The greatest manifestation of magical change was Isis, the quintessential goddess of magic. Although many gods used magic, Isis was the embodiment of Heka in its most basic form, creative metamorphosis capable of defeating death itself. The most profound potential of magic was proven by her brief reanimation and magical reassembly of Osiris, which reversed the ultimate cosmic border between life and death. As the most important practitioner of magic in Egyptian mythology, Isis was seen in several stories utilizing her magical knowledge to change circumstances, defend her son Horus, or outwit more physically strong deities. However, Egyptian magic was neither free nor self-centered. Knowledge, ritual, purity, and timing in accordance with auspicious days and astrological circumstances were necessary for proper magical activity. In temple rooms of life, where priest scribes read and copied holy manuscripts, the most potent magical texts were tightly guarded. Instead of being accepted as authentic Heka magic that broke Ma'at or endangered cosmic order, was denounced as deadly Isfet or chaos. The basic cosmic order created by the gods was supposed to be in harmony with, not in conflict with, one's own personal magical practice. The linguistic relationship between magic Heka, creative discourse, and efficient administration, was perhaps the most illuminating aspect of Egyptian views on transformation. Successful royal decrees and heavenly creative actions were explained by the same conceptual complex that described magical efficacy. The same transformational speech concept that drove magical incantations was proved by a pharaoh whose orders were successfully realized in reality. The same basic process was demonstrated by royal decrees, magical spells, and divine creative utterances. A civilization that saw reality as dynamic rather than static, process-oriented, rather than fixed and fundamentally sensitive to appropriate knowledge and ritual action, is revealed by the prevalence of transformational notions in Egyptian philosophy and the ability of well-crafted speech to turn potential into fact. Their mythology was more than just a collection of tales. It was a sophisticated symbolic system that articulated this fluid cosmology in which identities might blend together. Borders could be crossed, and even death itself could be defeated by correctly applying the cosmic laws guiding metamorphosis. This paradigm shift gave the Egyptians a framework for comprehending and relating to a cosmos that they perceived as both ordered and malleable, guided by observable laws, but open to human ritual participation for 3 millennia. Ancient Egyptian mythology was neither static nor homogeneous. Over the course of its 3,000-year history and its enormous area, which spanned from the Mediterranean coast to the Nubian frontiers, Egyptian religious ideas underwent amazing variation while retaining crucial continuity. Gods were combined or separated in response to changing cultural demands. Foreign deities were taken and changed, and regional theological traditions thrived alongside national cults. Egypt's distinct political structure, a unitary state that maintained strong regional identities, and an isolated civilization that continued to interchange cultures with neighboring powers, was represented in this multifaceted religious environment. Different regional religious traditions had emerged in the numerous population centers along the Nile, long before Egypt's governmental unity about 3100 BCE. Even after political consolidation, local deities' creation stories and religious customs persisted in each known administrative area. Instead of eradicating these regional customs, the united Egyptian state integrated them into a broader theological framework that recognized these differences while creating broad religious frameworks that promoted national cohesion. The most basic regional difference was that between the religious traditions of Upper and Lower Egypt, deities connected to moisture, fertility, and aquatic habitats were prevalent in the Lower Egyptian Nile Delta, where rich marshes and numerous river branches produced an abundant landscape. In Delta, religion, goddesses were especially important. Major worship sites were commanded by deities like Aswajit of Buto Bastet, of Bubastis, and Nath of Sais. Numerous Delta deities assumed symbolic forms as aquatic or marsh-dwelling animals, and Lower Egyptian creation stories frequently highlighted watery origins. Different theological emphases developed in Upper Egypt because the surrounding deserts were clearly separated from the narrow Nile Valley. Solar cults became especially popular, with Amun of Thebes and Ra of Heliopolis emerging as the 2 main male deities. Upper Egyptian creation stories most often focused on the primordial mound rising out of chaos, mirroring the yearly occurrence of land emerging from the waning flood. Upper Egyptian religious imagery was impacted by mountain ranges and desert boundaries, with deities connected with mineral richness, and falcon gods representing elevated locations. Different theological systems were created by local cities even within these larger territories. The Ogdoad of 8 primordial gods symbolized chaos before creation in Hermopolis. In Memphis, intelligent speech was used by the creator deity Tar to create the universe. Atum created the first heavenly couples in Heliopolis after emerging from primordial seas. Amun stood for the unseen power that created everything in Thebes. By creating complex theological defenses of their god's supremacy and simultaneously accepting the larger pantheon, each city attempted to place its local deity at the center of the cosmos. Egyptian priests used a number of highly developed intellectual techniques to overcome possible theological disputes brought up by these geographical variances. The most significant was syncretism, which is the blending of gods with comparable roles or characteristics to create composite forms. Gods with comparable realms might be merged rather than compete. Tar of Memphis and Sokar of the necropolis became Ptah. Sokar, Amun of Thebes, and Ra of Heliopolis became Amun-Ra, and Hathor of Dendera absorbed elements of several local deities. Deeper linkages between divine manifestations were revealed by these syncretistic combinations rather than the original deities being eliminated. Familial inclusion was another resolution technique in which local gods were portrayed as spouses' offspring or characteristics of nationally acknowledged deities. By identifying a regionally significant goddess as an expression of Isis or a daughter of Ra, the regional worship may be linked to national mythology while maintaining its unique identity. Likewise, regional and national religious systems had structural similarities as local deity triads, such as Osiris, Isis, Horus, frequently mirrored the national pattern of father, mother, child. The idea of theological geography is used in Egyptian theological literature to specifically recognize these geographical differences. It was believed that gods showed up differently in different places, with the main manifestation of a deity occurring in a given city. Religious literature may use Hathor Lady of Dendera or Horus of Edfu to denote certain local manifestations together with their own myths and characteristics. Egyptians were able to preserve the unique bond between gods and their worship centers, as well as the unity of divine personas beyond geographical boundaries, thanks to this advanced strategy. Religious beliefs also differed greatly by location and historical era, as did ideas about the afterlife. The ascent to the northern circumpolar stars, which never set below the horizon, was the focal point of the royal afterlife in the Old Kingdom pyramid inscriptions. Journeys via the Duat's underworld became more popular in Middle Kingdom coffin literature. The departed had to negotiate complex maps of otherworld topography created by New Kingdom funeral publications. These were complementary conceptions of life after death that could be emphasized based on historical context and local customs rather than opposing systems. Egyptian mythology was occasionally influenced by foreign religions in addition to regional variants, particularly in border regions and during times of international interaction. Canaanite gods like Asbel, Anat, and Astarte were integrated into Egyptian religion in the Eastern Delta. They were occasionally equated with or wedded to their Egyptian equivalents. In other stories, the warrior goddess Anat became Seth's spouse, while Seth was linked to the Canaanite storm deity Baal. Instead of being imported in bulk, these foreign gods were Egyptianized, that has given Egyptian imagery integrated into pre-existing mythical frameworks and tailored to Egyptian rituals. Foreign gods were officially recognized during the New Kingdom, when Egypt ruled over lands extending into the Near East, but they were still subject to the Egyptian cosmic order. Although she was portrayed as serving the Egyptian gods, the Canaanite goddess Astarte was honored at a temple constructed in Memphis by the pharaoh Amenhotep III. The Egyptian religion adopted the Nubian deity Dadon, although it was recast as a facet of Horus. Egyptian religion was able to incorporate foreign components while retaining its own identity and claims to cosmic supremacy because to this pattern of adoption and adaptation. Particularly intriguing theological changes occurred throughout Egypt's periods of foreign domination. During the Second Intermediate Period, the Hyksos, a Semitic nation, ruled over northern Egypt. They elevated their storm deity, who was connected to Seth, to a prominent position, and adopted Egyptian religious practices. Despite their Zoroastrian beliefs, Persian monarchs later portrayed themselves as typical pharaohs, carrying out Egyptian cosmic functions. The most advanced were the Ptolemaic Greeks, who combined Greek Hades and Zeus with Osiris and Apis to create hybrid deities like Serapis, bridging the gap between Egyptian and Greek religious traditions. These religious differences led to sporadic attempts at theological systematization throughout Egyptian history. To place local deities into the context of the great Ennead Heliopolis' priests arranged a variety of creator gods into generational sequences. Later, Theban priests recognized other gods as Amun's incarnations and exalted him to transcendent status. By characterizing all gods as facets of the sun, deity solar theology sought to bring disparate faiths together throughout the New Kingdom. Although they produced conceptual frameworks that might account for regional variances within cohesive cosmic systems, their religious endeavors never eradicated variety. When the revolutionary pharaoh Akhenaten ruled from 1353 to 1336 BCE, he abolished ancient religions and replaced them with exclusive worship of the Aten, the visible sun disk. This was the most extreme attempt at religious unity. Akhenaten tried to create a drastically simplified religion based on the royal family's bond with the sun, rejecting the rich mythical heritage and varied pantheon. Due to the swift restoration of traditional cults following his death, this experiment failed, indicating how deeply ingrained religious variety was in Egyptian society and how resilient it was to forced homogeneity. Egyptian religious variety is especially noteworthy because, in spite of these differences, it preserved essential theological coherence. Some fundamental ideas were constant throughout geographical areas and historical eras. Mayat, the cyclical aspect of existence, the potential of post-mortem transformation into divine status, and the universe's emergence from chaos by divine intervention. Although regional traditions developed these ideas in diverse ways, they all functioned within a common theological framework that encouraged both national unity and local expression. Thus, Egyptian religion struck a striking balance between variety and unity, allowing for historical development and regional expression while creating enough common foundation for societal cohesiveness. Its ability to adapt foreign components while retaining its own Egyptian identity allowed for cultural vitality in the face of shifting historical conditions. Egyptian religious pluralism valued both specific expressions and universal patterns within a complex mythological framework. This was not theological ambiguity. Rather, it was a sophisticated intellectual approach that acknowledged how divine reality could manifest differently across space and time while maintaining essential coherence. Egyptian mythology served as a surprisingly steady framework for interpreting life for almost 3,000 years, guiding one of the longest-lasting civilizations in history through shifting historical conditions while preserving crucial cultural continuity. However, even this timeless system of mythology eventually experienced deterioration, change, and even seeming extinction. The last chapter of this epic mythological tradition, which has influenced modern imagination for millennia, despite the distance between us and its original practitioners, tells the tale of how Egyptian mythology declined, but paradoxically survived through cultural transmission and modern rediscovery. Rather of collapsing abruptly, Egyptian mythology declined gradually over generations. Traditional religion grew stronger rather than weaker in the latter years when Egypt was subject to frequent foreign invasions and political unrest. Ancient books were reprinted, archaic forms were brought back to life, and temple construction proceeded with a fresh focus on historical authenticity. By highlighting their own religious traditions, this archiving movement was a cultural reaction to outside challenges. Even as political independence faded, Egyptians continued to retain their cultural identity. After Alexander's conquest, more difficulties were imposed during the Ptolemaic period. Greek monarchs introduced Hellenic cultural features while assuming Egyptian royal regalia and religious responsibilities, positioning themselves as classic pharaohs. In order to appeal to both Egyptian and Greek sensibilities, the ensuing religious landscape included both modern hybrid forms, such as the deity Serapis, and classic Egyptian cults. Despite their relatively recent dates, major temples like those at Edfu Dendera and Philae were built or extended during this time, and their walls are adorned in classic mythical themes. This policy of religious reverence was originally upheld under Roman control, which began in 30 BCE. Emperors dressed in pharaonic regalia were shown on temple walls carrying out customary ceremonies. Existing temples continued to function as places of worship, and Egyptian cults, such as that of Isis, proliferated across the Roman Empire, proving that Egyptian religious ideas were still relevant even when their native region was conquered by foreign powers. Despite mounting external pressures, Egyptian priests preserved their ancient knowledge. Hieroglyphic writing persisted in religious contexts, and fundamental mythological ideas persisted. The introduction of Christianity, not political shifts, posed the biggest threat to ancient Egyptian religion. Christian congregations were well established in Egypt by the 3rd century CE, especially in Alexandria and other major cities. By rejecting the worship of numerous deities, condemning animal-headed gods as demonic, and providing a linear rather than cyclical perspective on time and redemption, the new monotheistic faith directly attacked fundamental Egyptian religious ideas. In contrast to earlier foreign religious influences that had been assimilated into Egyptian structures, Christianity asserted its exclusivity and demanded that customs be abandoned. The active repression of traditional Egyptian religion increased in the 4th century CE as Christianity received imperial support. Theodosius I, the Roman emperor, banned pagan worship across the Roman Empire in 391 CE. In the same year, Christian crowds demolished the Serapeum of Alexandria, a significant temple complex that represented the shifting religious landscape. Temples were either disassembled for construction materials abandoned or transformed into churches. Priests lost their social standing and government support, and traditional religious knowledge was progressively disregarded. On the island of Philae, next to the first cataract of the Nile at the southern boundary, was the last bastion of traditional Egyptian religion. This temple remained open until about 550 CE, when Emperor Justinian finally ordered its closure. It was somewhat shielded by its distant location and agreements with Nubian tribes who still worshipped Isis. After almost 3 millennia of uninterrupted devotion, a remarkable religious lifespan equaled by few other traditions in human history. Institutional worship of the Egyptian gods came to an official end with this deed. However, ideas from Egyptian mythology did not instantly vanish from popular culture when temple worship was officially discontinued. For generations, folk customs that combined aspects of old religion with Christian components continued to exist in rural regions. Egyptian ideas of magical effectiveness persisted during the institutional shift, as evidenced by the ongoing invocation of old deities alongside Christian characters in Coptic magical works from the 6th to 8th century CE. Aspects of ancient mythology were preserved by cultural memory through festivals that retained their old time while being given a Christian meaning, even as Christianity emerged as Egypt's dominant religion. Hermeticism, a philosophical religious system that originated in Greco-Roman Egypt and claimed ancestry from the knowledge of Thoth identified with Greek Hermes, ergo Hermetic, was the most important conduit for the transfer of Egyptian legendary components. Egyptian religious ideas, especially those pertaining to cosmic order, divine wisdom, and the effectiveness of magic, are preserved in texts such as the Corpus Hermeticum. Long after hieroglyphics were rendered illegible, these texts continued to impact Western intellectual traditions by influencing Renaissance European thought and guaranteeing that some Egyptian conceptions, albeit in greatly altered form, persisted. Classical writers like Plutarch, Diodorus Siculus, and Iamblichus maintained significant mythical stories in their portrayals of Egyptian religion, but they interpreted them using Greek philosophical frameworks. This was a more direct but misinterpreted transfer. The most comprehensive surviving version of this fundamental Egyptian story was found in Plutarch's Onisis and Osiris, but it was mixed with Platonic ideas that were not familiar to the original Egyptians. Up until the 19th century, Western intellectuals relied heavily on these Hellenized interpretations of Egyptian mythology, leading to enduring misconceptions that still shape popular perceptions. The loss of hieroglyphic literacy was a significant turning point in the transmission of Egyptian mythology. The capacity to decipher hieroglyphics and hence access genuine Egyptian religious texts died along with conventional priesthoods. The final Demotic inscription dates to 452 CE, while the last dated hieroglyphic inscription dates to 394 CE. Even Egyptians themselves were unable to get first-hand knowledge of Egyptian mythology without the capacity to interpret original sources, and they began to perceive the enigmatic markings on ancient monuments as magical rather than linguistic cues. Hieroglyphics remained unintelligible for more than 1,000 years, and the major sources of Egyptian mythology were classical, second-hand narratives and more fanciful medieval interpretations. Despite their fascination, Renaissance academics misinterpreted hieroglyphics as solely symbolic rather than phonetic writing, leading to intricate but completely inaccurate interpretations based on symbolic guesses. Though remembered Egyptian mythology was severely misinterpreted and reduced to jumbled ideas that had lost their original context and significance. Napoleon's 1798 1801 Egyptian expedition, which included several scientists and academics who methodically researched Egyptian antiquities, marked the beginning of the rediscovery of true Egyptian mythology. Their discoveries sparked a fresh interest in understanding hieroglyphics and introduced Europe to Egypt's architectural and artistic accomplishments through the massive Description de l'Egypte. After 15 centuries of quiet access to the ancient Egyptian inscriptions was restored in 1822, when Jean-François Champollion successfully deciphered them using the Rosetta Stone. For the first time since late antiquity, authentic Egyptian religious scriptures were made available as hieroglyphic translation progressed throughout the 19th century. The Book of the Dead, coffin inscriptions, and pyramid texts all disclosed mythical ideas that were considerably more intricate and nuanced than those found in classical narratives. While narrative papyri found in tomb assemblages restored lost mythical stories, temple inscriptions offered previously undiscovered religious profundity. Scholarly knowledge of Egyptian mythology gradually evolved from a collection of unusual tales to an appreciation of a deep religious system that articulated intricate cosmological and theological ideas. This academic rediscovery came at the same time as more general cultural developments that popularized Egyptian ideas. Many people were fascinated with Egyptian aesthetics and symbolism as a result of the archaeological discoveries of ancient Egypt, especially the amazing discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. Egyptian mythology was often integrated into early science fiction and fantasy literature, while Western esoteric organizations such as Theosophy and occult societies claimed a connection to purported Egyptian knowledge. Although these widely accepted interpretations frequently had little in common with real Egyptian ideas, they made sure that Egyptian images persisted in contemporary culture. Egyptian mythology is still heavily incorporated into modern popular culture. Millions of people attend museum exhibits, and Egyptian gods and ideas are frequently radically altered in movies, books, and video games. Although these current interpretations tend to simplify and distort the ancient Egyptian knowledge, they maintain the key legendary stories in the public memory. Even while the original meanings of Egyptian religious iconography are sometimes forgotten, its visual distinctiveness, such as animal-headed gods, hieroglyphic writing, and pyramidal structures, ensures its enduring recognition. In the meantime, scholarly discourse on Egyptian mythology has grown increasingly sophisticated, concentrating on complex issues of theological evolution, regional variances, and the connection between popular and elite religious ideas. While applying anthropological and comparative religious techniques to existing material produces new insights, archaeological finds continue to provide new viewpoints. More thorough knowledge is now possible than ever, thanks to the digital preservation and examination of Egyptian holy writings, which are becoming more widely available to academics worldwide. What accounts for the enduring appeal of Egyptian mythology throughout such a wide range of historical and cultural contexts? Egyptian mythology tackles fundamental human issues in exceptionally vivid and captivating ways, in contrast to many ancient religious systems that appear completely foreign to contemporary sensibilities. Many of the same basic questions about existence, mortality, and meaning still resonate with modern humans because of its emphasis on regeneration and renewal, its hopeful outlook on life after death, its integration of cosmic and ethical concerns, and its striking visual representation of abstract concepts. Thus, Egyptian mythology holds a contradictory place in modern culture, both remarkably alive in cultural memory and imagination, and dead as a living religious institution. No society now bases its calendar on traditional Egyptian holidays. Hierophantic priesthoods no longer conduct daily rites, and the gods no longer receive sacrifices in temples devoted to them. However, aspects of this mythology are still present in popular culture, academic debate, and museum exhibits. This cultural afterlife seems strangely fitting for a mythical system so preoccupied with post-mortem existence and cyclical renewal, as it guarantees that the gods originally worshipped along the Nile remain in human consciousness for millennia after their original followers have vanished into history. Egyptian mythology has seen its own kind of rebirth, evolving from a live religious tradition to a cultural memory, from an inaccessible mystery to a subject of scientific investigation, and from lost wisdom to a source of creative inspiration, much like the scarab beetle dragging the solar disk across the sky. A testament to the persistent human ability to preserve, alter, and revive significant symbolic systems across time and cultural boundaries. Egyptian mythology exhibits its own version of the eternal return it so powerfully expressed in its continued existence despite institutional extinction. From the primordial waters of Nun to the judgment chamber of Osiris, from Ra's solar bark to the lush banks of the Nile, our exploration of Egyptian mythology has taken us across a wide panorama of heavenly creatures, cosmic dramas, deep concepts, and enduring cultural accomplishments. We have examined an incredibly complex and nuanced mythical system that has supported one of the most enduring civilizations in history over the course of more than 3,000 years of cultural development. As our investigation comes to a close, several basic trends show why this antiquated symbolic system still captivates us after all these centuries. The most unique aspect of Egyptian mythology was perhaps its deep optimism about life in general. Egyptian thinking praised the basic goodness of the structured universe, in contrast to mythical systems that saw creation as imperfect or existence as suffering, rather of a descent from perfection. Creation symbolized victory over disorder. Physical embodiment was a natural aspect of life, not a kind of spiritual captivity. Death itself was not final. Rather, it was a transitional stage leading to fresh and continuous life. From colossal architecture to everyday customs, Egyptian culture was infused with this life-affirming attribute, resulting in a society that lavished vast resources on celebrating and extending existence beyond the bounds of nature. This optimism functioned within a framework that was distinctively Egyptian and placed more emphasis on complementarity and balance than on outright hostility. Egyptian thinking acknowledged the inherent tension between order and chaos, viewing both as fundamental cosmic principles that require correct connection rather than complete victory of one over the other, in contrast to other traditions that could place good and evil as irreconcilable opposites. Even seeming opposites, like life and death, turned out to be complementary stages in greater cycles of existence, just as the sun needed darkness to regenerate, and the rich land needed the desert outside its boundaries. This sophisticated viewpoint produced a theological sophistication that could handle the complexity of reality without reducing it to oversimplified moral dichotomies. Egyptian mythology showed a remarkable ability to adapt and remain consistent over shifting historical contexts. While particular phrases changed to meet new cultural circumstances, fundamental ideas from pre-dynastic origins persisted throughout the Roman era. Egyptian civilization was able to preserve cultural coherence over vast periods of time while adjusting to shifting political, social, and intellectual circumstances, because to this careful balancing act between innovation and conservation. The mythology evolved naturally within pre-existing frameworks, rather than being radically altered or reimagined, illustrating how symbolic systems may change while retaining their fundamental characteristics. Numerous viewpoints and expressions functioning within broad cosmic patterns, as well as plurality within unity, were characteristics of the Egyptian mythical cosmos. Many views of divine reality were produced by historical processes, theological schools, and regional variances. However, these were perceived as complementary viewpoints on realities too fundamental for a single presentation, rather than as opposing viewpoints. Egyptian mythology was able to simultaneously address cosmological themes and practical concerns across a variety of social circumstances, because to this intellectual method, which made room within the same religious framework for both popular devotion and advanced theological inquiry. Egyptian mythology addressed essentially human issues that cut over cultural and time barriers despite its seeming exoticism to Westerners. How did chaos give way to order in the world? Which cosmic laws rule life? How are divine capabilities to be seen by humans? After death, what happens? How can we balance individual behavior with cosmic patterns, order and disturbance, and cycle and change? Egyptians respond to these fundamental issues in unique ways, using imagery that is culturally peculiar. However, the fundamental issues are still relevant to modern people who continue to struggle with purpose, mortality, and our position in the greater scheme of things. Despite the loss of its original religious practice, Egyptian mythology's visual distinctiveness, animal-headed deities, hieroglyphic writing, and massive architecture has guaranteed its ongoing recognition in cultural memory. A mythical system that was especially well-suited for transmission through artistic representation was created by this potent visual language, which conveyed intricate theological ideas through instantly identifiable symbolic shapes. Even visitors who are not familiar with Egyptian religion are immediately drawn to its unique aesthetic, which continues to shape modern visual culture in everything from popular entertainment to museum exhibits. Egyptian mythology fundamentally conveyed a deep understanding of life as a process rather than a static state, as dynamic patterns of becoming rather than static being. Creation was a continuous process that needed to be maintained against entropic forces. Rather of being static entities, divine beings were malleable manifestations that might change and merge. Humans were creatures working toward posthumous divine status rather than completed creations, a mythological system that was remarkably sensitive to the natural cycles of development, decline, and regeneration that were evident in the Egyptian environment, was produced by this process orientation. The timeless attraction of Egyptian mythology, which includes the yearly cycle of the Nile, heavenly motions, and human growth, is partially due to its exceptional harmony between mystery and accessibility. While its theological depth rewards greater investigation with ever deeper insights, its dramatic storytelling and rich imagery offer instant points of entry for even casual involvement. The visual effect of a goddess with golden wings or a deity with falcon heads draws attention right away. However, these stunning pictures conceal intricate cosmological ideas that have been the subject of decades of scholastic investigation. Egyptian mythology may serve as both a significant intellectual topic and a popular cultural reference because to its multi-layered approachability. Most notably, Egyptian mythology developed a thorough framework that combined the social, cosmic, and individual facets of life into a logical totality. The same ideas that clarified global patterns also governed societal structures and human behavior, establishing a smooth link between personal experience and cosmic order. The sun, the god who upholds cosmic order via his daily trip, was compared by the monarch who upholds Mayawad by appropriate government. This in turn parallels how people uphold right relationships through moral behavior. A mythical system where individual acts had cosmic importance and universal patterns served as templates for human conduct was produced by this blending of macro and micro scales. We are no longer able to access Egyptian mythology as its original practitioners did after thousands of years and significant cultural changes. Time language changes, theological transformations, and cultural discontinuities have all contributed to the breakup of the living tradition. However, a thorough examination of the surviving writings and monuments reveals something fundamental that provides hints of an extraordinarily advanced way of living that evolved along the Nile over millennia of intellectual development. Despite its historical distance, this mythological system continues to provide insights because it was a sophisticated symbolic framework for comprehending and interacting with reality, rather than a rudimentary kind of superstition. The Egyptian mythical viewpoint provides insightful alternate ways of thinking as we modern humans deal with our own existential issues, environmental crises, technical advancements, social disarray, and spiritual ambiguity. Its emphasis on cyclical renewal, as opposed to linear progress, its understanding that apparent opposites must complement one another, its integration of the material and spiritual aspects of existence, and its deep appreciation of continuity in the face of change offer conceptual tools for rethinking how we relate to time, the natural world, and cosmic patterns. We may learn from the unique way the ancient Egyptians approached timeless human issues, even though we cannot simply apply their viewpoints to contemporary situations. Though they may no longer be worshipped in temples, the gods of Egypt live on in people's minds, thanks to academic research, artistic expression, and cultural memory. This tenacity throughout millennia points to something basic about these symbolic representations of cosmic forces and human experience, something that goes beyond their particular cultural setting to speak to underlying patterns of existence that hold true even in the face of shifting conditions. Their mythology has seen its own kind of death and rebirth, changed but still identifiable throughout the vast stretches of time, much like the phoenix that the Egyptians dubbed the Bennu bird. Speaking the deceased's name according to Egyptian belief helped them live on after they passed away. We have engaged in this age-old act of remembering that prevents ultimate extinction, as we have said the names of Osiris and Isis Ra and Hothor Thoth and Anubis during our exploration. The gods of Egypt are still alive in human consciousness despite the destruction of their temples and the dispersion of their priesthoods. This is evidence of the fleeting nature of particular religious organizations, as well as the timeless ability of mythological symbolism to convey important life lessons that cut beyond linguistic, cultural, and temporal barriers.